gives me great pleasure to say that our remarks for Yom Kippur this evening will be delivered by a guest deliverer. I'm doing my best to avoid the word sermon, which I guest remarks delivering person. I'm really very excited and happy to invite Aviva Stein to the bima. I've known Aviva and her family for a very long time, and for many years Aviva has been the family education coordinator, part-time, at Tzedek Chicago. But this new year, this new fiscal year at Tzedek, which begins in July, Aviva has become our full-time community and organizational director. And, as I said, this is more than naches, although it is that for me, but it's just such a huge pleasure to be able to know and work together with Aviva as a colleague and a friend, and already our community has reaped the benefits of Aviva's really important leadership. So I've invited Aviva to say a few words apropos of this Yom Kippur.
Oh, I don't have a mic though.
Oh.
Should I stand over there?
No.
How about, no.
Just-
How about, can you hear, no. What? What? Can you hear me? Keep talking. How about that? All right. All right. What an introduction. Good Yontif. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak to you tonight. As Brant said, I began working at Tzedek Chicago as our family program coordinator in early 2019, and July of this year, I became our second full-time staff person. Yes. I'm speaking to you now at Kol Nidre of Yom Kippur in the year 5785, as a genocide is being carried out against the Palestinian people. For the past many months, and particularly on this day of reflection, as the gates of heaven open wide for our most intimate and vulnerable supplication, my mind comes back to the question, how could we let this happen? One answer I keep returning to is that this tragedy is in part a product of the decades-long campaign by American Jewish institutions to build nationalist, dogmatic support for the state of Israel within our communities, and particularly in our children. When reflecting on my own upbringing, the clarity with which I can see the indoctrination of my Jewish education as a young person is chilling. From my summer camp's obligatory high school Israel trip, where we dressed up in IDF uniforms and took pictures for Instagram, to Israeli Club, the only Jewish affinity space at my public high school, which I later learned was funded by an Orthodox youth education organization. From the March for Israel being an annual youth group event, to singing the Israeli national anthem in Hebrew school. When I look back, I see the many ways nationalist fervor created an ersatz version of Jewish identity for me as a child. I had been taught that being Jewish was loving Israel, and I believed it. By the time I was in college, I had become a successful product of what all that institutional Zionist funding had set out to do. My first job after college was in 2014 as a teacher's aide at a local Jewish day school. I was sitting in on the daily Jewish studies classes where I, for the first time, was able to clearly see the ideological manipulation of the Israel education machine. At that point, I did not identify as a Zionist. I didn't feel that I had enough political knowledge to know what that meant. I know now that internalized sense of ignorance is a tool well used by the Zionist establishment, telling us that it was too complicated and we didn't understand was a reliable way to suppress dissent among their targets. At that time, I did, though, feel an obligation to the state of Israel as a Jewish person. Watching those children create maps of Israel that highlighted popular tourist destinations, making pita, and hanging pictures of Jewish men praying at the Western Wall, I had the perspective I needed to question the establishment in which I was raised and in which I was watching these children grow up. Wasn't Israel a country just like the US? And wasn't it a country at war? My family openly objected to the war in Iraq. Why not in Israel? I had questions that I, as a young adult, knew were too taboo to ask. But I had a new perspective in my position as a teacher of experiential and inquiry-based education. Wasn't being afraid to ask questions an indicator that something was very, very wrong? That same year, if not now, held its first public action when a small group of young Jewish activists read the Mourner's Kaddish in New York City in recognition of the Palestinian lives lost in the assault on Gaza that summer. Also in 2014, my childhood rabbi, Brant Rosen, left the synagogue in which I had grown up in the wake of his increased outspokenness about human rights violations in Palestine that were being committed in our names as Jews. My questioning came at a moment in US history when objection to the occupation of Palestine in the Jewish community was more visible than ever. Without looking very hard, I was able to find community that ultimately carried me through the process of unlearning Zionism. I recognize that opportunity of being guided in loving, joyful Jewish community towards a Judaism of solidarity as a real gift for my generation, one that was not afforded to so many Jews of conscience in the decade before me. My heart breaks when I see the same cycle of propaganda and silencing posing as pedagogy continue in Jewish education today. 6 years ago, I took a job at a religious school where I felt it was special that I was allowed to teach while being open with leadership, but not the community, about my politics. It was challenging to work somewhere where I was not politically aligned, but it was a job and I could manage. In October of last year, something broke in that community. Donors who had made their contributions with strings attached started pulling those strings, and leadership, which had prided itself on a liberal and open perspective on Palestine, quickly adopted the right-wing politics of their biggest donors. This spring, after months of censorship posing as policy, when my coworker was told that they could not wear a keffiyeh for explicitly Islamophobic reasons, we quit. They're here tonight, too. I am ashamed of the choice that that synagogue made to uphold racism, to shield its community from critical engagement with the devastation of Palestine. But my coworker and I were not alone. Since March, 11 full and part-time staff people at that progressive organization have left their jobs. Yeah. In the past year, Adam and Leah, Tzedek Chicago's cantorial team, also have left. Adam and Leah, Tzedek Chicago's cantorial team, both have left Jewish education jobs in solidarity with Palestine. Around the country, I know of a dozen more people who have left their jobs this past year by being fired or quitting. There is an epidemic in the Jewish community. Young people are losing and leaving their jobs, and the Jewish community is losing the passion, critical thinking, and vitality that their best and brightest brought to their work. So many Jewish organizations are breaking this way. The big tent, so to speak, has collapsed. And Jews of conscience, Jews who say no to genocide and no to Islamophobia and no to anti-Arab racism and warmongering, find ourselves on the outside. But outside does not mean alone. Over the past 10 years at Tzedek Chicago, our membership has seen tremendous growth to nearly 400 member households. Yeah. Our family program community has grown from 4 families to 7 to more than 20. And for the past 6 years, we've seen our children build a joyful Jewish space rooted in solidarity with Palestine. Our membership has grown as a blended community across generations, and our most active members range from movement elders to very young children, all of whom are committed to this new Jewish future that we are building together. These past 10 years have experienced a blossoming in Jewish communal life beyond Zionism, not just at Tzedek Chicago, but around the world. Making Menches in New York, Tirdof in Denver, and Macomb in North Carolina are all explicitly anti-Zionist Jewish ritual communities. Organizing Spaces If Not Now and JVP have become household names. The Jewish Liberation Fund has successfully challenged the status quo in philanthropy and offers grants for proudly anti-Zionist Jewish work, of which Tzedek Chicago has been a beneficiary. Tzedek UK Ireland is a thriving community. In Chicago, we are now home to 2 prayer communities beyond Zionism, Tzedek Chicago and Higalina. We are also joined tonight by a group of 30 students from Northwestern, SAIC, DePaul, and UIC, and we're so glad you're here. There are, of course, many more chavarot, friend groups, and organizing communities around the country making meaningful Jewish life that rejects Zionism. So much has changed in the last 10 years. And I believe it with all my heart when I say that we have entered a paradigm shift where the politicized, young, queer, disabled, and neurodivergent people we have relied on to staff our Hebrew schools and summer camps will no longer accept propaganda and nationalism as normal. We don't have to. We can choose to work in Jewish organizations that are actually values-aligned, rather than those that just allow us our politics. Of course, these opportunities are few relative to Zionist institutions, but I believe that we are moving towards a Jewish future where the social norm of Zionism will become increasingly rare, and where communities like ours are not an anomaly, but a standard of Jewish communities around the country. It has been truly meaningful to see what had felt like such a lonely landscape become so varied and rich. And as heartening as this change is, it feels essential that we acknowledge that this is nowhere near enough. It breaks my heart that this is considered such a radical concept, a joyful community of people who are committed to a world beyond colonialism and oppression and who say so, full stop. It breaks my heart that the victories that we have to celebrate are about staffing and organizational capacity as we watch the devastation of Palestine in real time. 12 years ago, I was pursuing a degree in environmental studies, and I remember very clearly a class where we discussed the mounting science pointing to the inevitability of climate collapse, just a couple years after it had become remotely socially acceptable to even use the term global warming. Something really big is going to happen, we said, and people will realize something will change, something has to give. This was 7 years after Hurricane Katrina and 2 years after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And still, we found ourselves saying, something really big is going to happen. And then, this memory haunts me as we consider the fight for Palestinian liberation. Climate collapse is here. I don't need to list the many ways that we experience its consequences. We know it's here. We're right now seeing the extent of the destruction brought by hurricanes Helene and Milton, record-breaking storms inarguably exacerbated by rapidly warming seas. The consequence of our inaction is here. The Nakba happened. The ethnic cleansing of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes, creating the largest refugee population in the world, happened. The occupation of millions of Palestinians happened. This year, at least 40,000 people, though we know in truth many, many more, have been murdered. Entire family lines are gone from this earth, and we suffer for the loss of each one of those lives. There's nothing bigger, there's nothing greater that will awaken our collective consciousness. The consequence of our inaction is here. The unthinkable has happened, and it's happening right now as we sit here, gathered on this holiest day, the gates of heaven open wide. We will never get back the biodiversity that once blanketed the earth, nor the beauty and freedom and abundance that it provided. And the earth is not lost. Songbirds migrate, leaves change their color, networks of fungus communicate through untold billions of channels under our feet. I mourn for the world that we might have lived in had those tens of thousands of lives not been lost. The world and our souls are irrevocably damaged by this unthinkable loss of life. And in the face of this unimaginable loss, we, as Jewish people, as Americans, as living beings on this earth, we owe Palestine our radical imagination. We owe our steadfast belief that Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free, nation-states will fall, families will flourish, and we will live in a world where everyone is fed and everyone is housed, and children will play in riverbeds and groves of olive trees. We are painfully far from that dream. Our small successes in the face of unspeakable evil are just that, small. Kabbalah teaches that every time a person performs a mitzvah, they bring us that tiniest step closer to Olam Haba, the world to come. I do not believe that a Messiah will come and save us from the world that we have created for ourselves. I do believe that when we make visible our refusal to participate in the Judaism of violence and supremacy that is normative in our institutions, that we become that small bit more visible to the people who are looking for us. To the young people first entering a critical perspective of Israel, to the people who need to leave their job but don't know where they can go, to the people who love being Jewish and don't believe that it makes their safety more important than anyone else's, they can find us. We're here. And no, the visibility of Jews who reject Zionism will not free Palestine. But our communities are growing. And as we grow, and as our voices become louder, and as we send our money and march in the streets and dedicate our prayer and build our power, we bring more and more people into the sacred responsibility of radical imagination. As Aurora Levins-Morales writes in Ve'ahavta, when you inhale and when you exhale, breathe the possibility of another world into the 37.2 trillion cells of your body until it shines with hope. Then imagine more. We are here tonight on the eve of Yom Kippur to release all the vows we have not fulfilled and to recommit ourselves to the holy work of teshuvah, of imagining more. Thank you for being here. We will be here, and Palestine will be free, soon and in our days. Gamar Chatima Tova.